Well, many thanks, Wakaba. Today is a historic day. Kenya will be presenting the biggest budget in the economics history, and that is 2.62 trillion shillings. So far, at the moment, members of parliament still streaming in here at the National Assembly, as well as some of the senators, and we'll be keen to hear what this year's budget will be having to offer for the Kenyans. And of course, Wakaba, a lot of expectation on which areas will this year's for the National Treasury be considering to target this time round when it comes to matters of taxation, as well as which areas will he also consider giving people a relief. A lot of Kenyans have been issuing concerns around the cost of basic commodities such as unga, that being maize flour, cooking fat. And we want now to bring in Senator Mutula Kilonzo, who sits in the Senate, and we just want to get his perspective on what should we expect in this year's budget. Many thanks, Mheshimiwa, for joining us on KTN, and perhaps talk to us, what are your expectations this budget day?
I'm expecting a people-friendly budget. Now that the president, in the State of the Nation address,
Yes,
said that the economy has improved, and that although they had promised a double-digit growth, there should be a substantial growth also, in sense of the pockets of the common mwananchi. Mama Mudheu, Mama Mwekali, Mama Mboga want to know what exactly it translates. I expect the CS Treasury to break it down in such a manner that the common mwananchi understands what it's talking about. The essence of what we did in the new constitution was to enable him to issue a financial statement, because the budget estimates and the figures will be given to Parliament. Ideally, he should speak to Kenyans, so that when he talks about all these big projects, where they will get the money, how they will get the money, the common mwananchi can understand that there are two things. One, that there will be more disposable income for them in terms of spending, and they will be taxed less. Alternatively, you will tax them, but they will get services in return.
Interesting. And Senator, just looking back at last year's budget, there was heavy focus on trying to cut taxes on things like cooking gas, where we did see this year's wave tax on LPG. We did see also a lot of interest going towards rental tax. And we've not heard much about cutting down on the public wage bill, which has been a thorny issue in the flesh for many Kenyans, saying that a few percentage of the population is gobbling up all these billions of shillings that could be reallocated to other critical areas.
Yes. What ideally should happen other than the wage bill? Because that argument, in my view, has only focused on salaries. There's something we call austerity measures. We should reduce on waste. And the person who ideally should speak about this is the CS Treasury, because he should be the one giving the pillar of financial prudence to the whole country, so that the counties can follow that we need to spend less. We need to cut down on unnecessary expenses. We need to cut down on things we do not need, and translate that money that we are spending into something that is useful for the purposes of helping Kenyans.
And looking at the budget as well, Senator, there has been a sharp focus towards devolution, where we're seeing counties have been demanding for more allocation. At the same time, there's a lot of concern when it comes to corruption and also budget absorption, which remain aspects that are being debated in the House, as well as in the mwananchi level. They are concerned about has devolution given the promise it was meant to?
First and foremost, I want to say this. One, that we have never completed something that Christian Lagarde, IMF director, spoke about. 3 C's. One is called complete fiscal devolution. When we say complete fiscal devolution, is that under the Constitution, the resources should follow the functions. And I just pick one, the functions of health. The budget on health has increased at national level since 2013 tremendously, as opposed to at county level. And therefore, we haven't done that. On the promise of devolution, I've said this, that this is the real independence of this country. is devolution. And the excuse that there's low absorption is an excuse given in Nairobi, because counties in the first year have been trying to put in mechanisms, capacity building, etc., etc. It's not like the national government has less problems on absorption of resources. But that should not be an excuse, because the Constitution is very clear that resources shall be transferred immediately upon when Parliament has passed them. So the promise of devolution must be actualized. But the only way to actualize devolution, I must say, is not to pay lip service to it. What you do not know is that 70% of our budgets are going to payment of what we call recurrent expenses. 8 counties that were in the 8 provinces are suffering from huge wage bills because they absorbed workers from the national government. And therefore, to insist that we must have development, you must also increase the kitty so that the development budget and portfolio goes above 30%.
Right.
That is the only way Kenyans will realize development, because we can't pay more salaries and get less services.
Sure.
We should say that we are paying so much for work, and our cities are clean, there's work being done, so that we can have a meaningful development.
Interesting. And Senator, as we wrap up, looking at this year's budget, it's one of the biggest in Kenya's history, 2.62 trillion shillings. Do you feel we've been having a deficit in terms of our raising taxes? We're seeing KRA should be able to collect about a trillion plus. The deficit, we can raise it domestically or borrow overseas. Are you concerned about our debt levels as a country?
I'm concerned about debt levels, but there's something you raised, which is called revenue leakage. To the extent, therefore, that both at county level and at national level, you have a lot of income that is being collected that is not finding itself either into bank accounts or is not being banked or is not being accounted for. The question that KRA must be able to ask is whether they have completely assessed the situation to the extent that they are taxing everybody who needs to be taxed. Is everybody paying their taxes? But on the debt level, that is something that should concern us. And from what I know, is that the CS Treasury, instead of saying that we have borrowed, we are sustaining our debt, is to say, how are we going to pay our debts in future? Are we raising enough local revenue to be able to sustain our debt? We do not want a situation where we are borrowing for luxury. You're borrowing to consume, a consumer budget. And therefore, my concern about the budget still remains, and particularly on debt. And let me say this, being a senator and a person who is concerned about counties, what Kenyans do not know, that the effect of borrowing on the counties is that the way the Constitution is structured is that we have to, first of all, consider the debt before we allocate revenue to countries. Fantastic. So the more we borrow, we reduce the bottom lines. We must borrow less. Thank you.
Thanks. Senator Mutula Kilonzo there, just talking to us as we expect the budget reading to happen this afternoon. And of course, Wakaba and the rest of the team back in studio. It is an interesting conversation happening here. We've heard there from Senator Mutula Kilonzo. Let me now bring in the lead of majority, and that is Aiden Duale, just to get a sense of what is in the budget speech. Many thanks, Mheshimiwa, for making time for us.
Thank you very much.
Let's just kick it off. And what should you expect in this year's budget?
This budget is basically the report that we passed yesterday. Because under this system, the budget making process is a function of the National Assembly as per the Constitution. So in terms of budget estimate and allocations to various government ministries and departments and other offices and agencies, that I can speak. But of course, the taxation measures, either raising or reducing, will be done, will be tabled this afternoon by the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury. When he brings the finance bill. But of course, this budget gears mainly deals with and has given an affirmative in terms of allocation to infrastructure, to manufacturing and industrialization, to security, to the social safety nets, to healthcare. And above all, it gives some substantial resources to some of the pledges and the manifesto pledges of the Jubilee, the digital learning devices and all that. So the Ministry of Defense, for example, for the first time is getting more allocation in order to modernize our military in terms of equipment and...
Do you know how much?
I think for only the modernization, the military modernization, 15.7 billion have been allocated for that sector, both in terms of buying more aircraft, warships, latest arms technology. So that's something very, very unique in this. And of course, the National Assembly in the Division of Revenue Bill allocated 323 billion for the counties. The Senate added another 29 billion, which the House rejected yesterday, and now it's going for mediation.
All right. And Leader Majority, of course, we are going in an election season in the next few months from now. And what should we expect in terms of allocation to the IEBC and also the judiciary?
I think both Parliament has, there are three arms of government that actually receives separate vote link. The judiciary have about, I think, between 17 and 20 billion allocation in terms of recurrent development. Parliament has 36 billion. And I want to make it very, very clear that the 8th month severance pay that is talking about out there, it's not factored in this budget. So the MCAs out there watching me, that you have no ground to say that members of parliament are being paid, because this is a transitional parliament, and it's very, very clear. Even in the judgment of Judge Eleanor in 2012, it says this parliament, the 11th parliament, will not live to its full term.
All right.
So no 8 months severance pay for members of parliament. Same for MCAs, same for governors, same for the president. But this budget mainly is a transitional budget. The minister for the first time has overshoot his ceiling by only 1 billion. It's a very, very good budget in terms of the estimates. Secondly, for the first time, the minister in his 2.6 trillion budget, he expects Kenya Revenue Authority to raise about 1.7 trillion.
That's too ambitious.
Yes, it's not ambitious. Kenya Revenue Authority, and I want to thank them. If you read the history, when we took over government, KRA was raising 867 billion. In 3 years, they have raised 1.3, 1.4 trillion. So they just need to make sure that they seal all the loopholes and they widen the tax bracket. And I'm sure it is an obligation on each and every Kenyan to pay his taxes. So with 1.3 is ambitious, is high, but I'm sure the man at the helm, Commissioner General Njuraini and his team and his board, a team that we must be proud of. They've given us economic independence. So he has a deficit of 900 billion. From the 900 billion, the minister anticipates to raise both from the donors and from the domestic market about 600 billion. So ideally, he will only have a deficit of 300 billion.
Yes. Many thanks there, Aiden Duale, Leader of Majority in the National Assembly, just talking to us as we head to the budget reading expected this afternoon. A lot of issues being raised on the budget deficit. But will the Cabinet Secretary be tabling some unexpected taxation measures? All this will be covered for you from Parliament here with KTN News. I now cross over back to our studios.